The chandeliers blazed overhead like 1,000 unblinking eyes as the waltz swelled to its crescendo. And Lyra Dacre felt the familiar weight of her horsehair wig shift dangerously against her damp temples. She stood at the ballroom's edge, her fan frozen mid-flutter, as the passing waiter's tray caught the lace netting at her nape. The tearing sound seemed louder than the orchestra. "Good God," someone gasped behind her. "Is that padding?" "Not padding," another voice corrected with surgical precision. "The Dacre girl, the one with the fever. They say she's bald as an egg beneath all that French lace." The music stumbled, died. 200 faces turned as one. Lyra's throat constricted, but her chin remained high, just as her governess had trained her before the creditors came. Her father materialized at her shoulder, gripping her arm with the desperation of a drowning man clutching driftwood. "Smile," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Lord Pembroke is watching." He might still, but Lord Pembroke was already moving. The handsome earl who had courted her for 3 weeks, who had written sonnets comparing her golden curls to spun sunshine, crossed the parquet floor with the measured pace of a man approaching a leper colony. His eyes, which had sparkled with admiration over ices at Gunter's just yesterday, now held the flat assessment of a horse trader discovering rot in a mare's hoof. "Miss Dacre." His voice carried across the sudden silence, pitched for maximum audience. "I find I must beg your forgiveness." Lyra's fingers found the torn edge of her wig's netting, holding it against her scalp as if willpower alone could reverse what had been revealed. Beneath the horsehair, her own hair lay sparse and fragile, visible now as pale patches against her scalp. "My lord, if we might speak privately." "There is nothing private about deception." Pembroke's jaw tightened. "I was led to believe I was courting a lady of quality and wholeness, not a—" He gestured vaguely at her head, unable or unwilling to name what she had become. "Damaged goods," Lady Cartwright supplied helpfully from her position near the refreshment table. The dowager's voice dripped with the satisfaction of a woman who had predicted this exact outcome. "The fever took more than her health, it seems. How very unfortunate that certain families attempt to pass off spoiled merchandise in the marriage market." Lyra's father stepped forward, his face mottled with humiliation and rage. "My daughter is the same woman she was 5 minutes ago, Pembroke. The same wit, the same accomplishments." "The same lie," Pembroke cut in. He turned to address the assembled guests, playing to the crowd like an actor on Drury Lane. "I wonder how many other gentlemen have been subjected to this fraud? Dancing with what appears to be a beauty, only to discover one has been courting an illusion built on horsehair and deception." A titter of nervous laughter rippled through the ballroom. Lyra felt it like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She had prepared for rejection, had steeled herself for the inevitable moment when some suitor would learn the truth and quietly withdraw his suit. But this public evisceration, this transformation of her private shame into evening entertainment, carved something vital from her chest. "I never claimed," she began, but her voice emerged thin and reedy, swallowed by the vast space. "You never claimed, but you certainly implied," countered Miss Honoria Blackwood, Pembroke's cousin, stepping forward with the predatory grace of a woman scenting blood in the water. "All those elaborate coiffures, those towering arrangements of curls. We thought you vain, when in truth you were simply desperate." "Desperate and deceitful," Lady Cartwright agreed, warming to the theme. "One wonders what other deficiencies have been concealed beneath silk and subterfuge." Lyra's vision began to narrow at the edges, the glittering crowd blurring into a mass of hostile faces. Her hand trembled as she maintained her death grip on the ruined wig. knowing that removing it entirely would grant them the complete spectacle they craved. Yet holding it in place made her look like a child clinging to a broken doll. Pembroke produced a small velvet box from his waistcoat, the ring he had planned to present tonight, transforming their courtship into a formal engagement. He held it up for the assembly to see before snapping it shut with theatrical finality. "I'm afraid I cannot in good conscience bind myself to a woman who has demonstrated such a profound lack of integrity. The foundation of marriage must be honesty, and I find none here." "My lord, please," Lyra's father pleaded, his earlier bluster collapsing into raw desperation. "If you would allow me to explain the circumstances, the physician said her hair would return with time and proper treatment. Time which I shall spend pursuing a wife who comes to me as she appears, not as she wishes to be." Pembroke bowed with exaggerated courtesy. "Miss Dacre, I wish you well in your future endeavors, though I suspect you'll find the marriage market has little use for damaged merchandise, however cleverly packaged." He turned on his heel and strode toward the ballroom's entrance, his departure serving as the signal others had been waiting for. The crowd began to shift and swirl, conversations resuming at a pitch carefully calculated to ensure Lyra could hear every vicious syllable. "I heard the fever turned her mind, as well as stripped her scalp. No wonder the Dacres have been so eager to marry her off. Who would take her now? She's been publicly rejected by an earl." Lyra stood in the center of the parquet floor, an island of humiliation in a sea of silk and judgment. Her father had turned away, unable to meet her eyes. The musicians had resumed playing, but couples gave her a wide berth as they returned to the dance, as if her condition might prove contagious. She had been reduced to a cautionary tale, a specter at the feast. The girl who had tried to cheat nature and society both, and had paid the price in the currency of public shame. And then, cutting through the whispers like a blade through water, came the master of ceremonies' voice. "His Grace, the Duke of Islay. My lovely family, before we continue with this story, like, share, subscribe, and tell me in the comments section where you are watching from." The crowd parted with the instinctive deference reserved for titles ancient enough to predate the conquest. And Lyra found herself staring at a man who seemed carved from the Scottish Highlands themselves. All sharp angles and unyielding stone, wrapped in evening clothes that sat on his broad frame with uncomfortable formality. Bramwell Hurst, Duke of Islay, moved through the assembled guests with the detached interest of a naturalist observing a particularly distasteful species of insect. His eyes, pale gray and unsettlingly direct, swept past the gawking faces without acknowledgement until they settled on Lyra, with an intensity that made her breath catch. He stopped 3 feet from where she stood clutching her ruined wig, and executed a bow so precise it bordered on mockery, though whether he mocked her or the assembly remained unclear. "Miss Dacre," he said, his voice carrying the burr of the North, "you appear to be in need of rescue." Before she could formulate a response, he turned to face the ballroom at large, his posture radiating the kind of authority that came from bloodlines stretching back to when England was a collection of warring kingdoms. "I find these London assemblies grow more tiresome each season. The entertainment has become positively barbaric." Lady Cartwright bristled. "Your Grace, I hardly think—" "No," he interrupted, his tone suggesting he was commenting on the weather rather than delivering an insult. "You hardly do. Think, that is, it's a common affliction among your set." His gaze swept the room with arctic disdain. "You circle a wounded creature like jackals, congratulating yourselves on your superiority, never considering that the capacity for cruelty is hardly a virtue to celebrate." A shocked silence descended, broken only by the nervous shuffle of feet against parquet. Lyra's father found his voice, though it emerged hoarse with barely suppressed hope. Your Grace honors us with his presence, my daughter. Your daughter, the Duke cut in, published a treatise on agricultural reform last year under the pseudonym L.D. Hartwell. I found her proposals regarding crop rotation in northern climates both innovative and practical. I've implemented several on my estates with considerable success. Lyra's hand fell away from her wig, shock temporarily overriding humiliation. No one was supposed to know about the pamphlet. She'd published it through a radical printer in Edinburgh, never imagining anyone of consequence would actually read it, much less recognize her authorship. How did you... Your writing style is distinctive, precise yet passionate. Rather like your watercolors of botanical specimens, the collection displayed at the Royal Society's exhibition 3 months ago. He paused, allowing this second revelation to land. You signed those LD as well. Not particularly elaborate subterfuge for a woman of your intellect. Miss Blackwood tittered nervously. Surely your Grace cannot be serious. Ladies don't write about agriculture. It's unseemly. Ladies of your acquaintance might not possess the capacity, he replied without looking at her. Miss Dacre, however, understands that land management requires more than decorative knowledge. Her section on drainage systems alone demonstrated a grasp of engineering principles that would shame half the gentlemen in whites. Lyra felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the familiar world of judgment and rejection tilting into something entirely foreign. You read my work. I study anything of merit. He reached into his coat and withdrew a letter, sealed with ducal wax. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. I came to London specifically to make you an offer, though I confess I expected to do so under more conventional circumstances. Her father surged forward, nearly tripping in his eagerness. An offer? Your Grace, we would be most honored to discuss. I'm addressing your daughter, Dacre. She has demonstrated significantly more wit than you this evening. The Duke's attention never wavered from Lyra's face. I require a wife. Not for the usual insipid reasons that drive men to matrimony, but because my estate needs someone capable of understanding its complexities. I'm establishing a model agricultural community in Islay. Experimental farming techniques, improved housing for tenants, a school for both boys and girls. It's radical work that London society would consider dangerously progressive. He held out the letter. Lyra took it with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of the thick parchment and the elaborate seal. I need a partner with intellectual courage and the resilience to withstand opposition. Someone who has already proven she can think beyond society's narrow confines. His eyes flickered briefly to her exposed scalp, before returning to her face with no change in expression. Someone who understands what it means to be judged by superficial standards and found wanting, regardless of one's actual worth. Your Grace, Lady Cartwright interjected, her fan fluttering with agitation. Surely you cannot mean to align yourself with a girl who has been publicly rejected. By Lord Pembroke? The Duke's lip curled with something approaching amusement. A man whose greatest intellectual achievement is selecting his waistcoats? Pembroke's rejection serves as a rather sterling recommendation. Lyra stared at the letter, her mind racing through the impossibility of what was happening. Half an hour ago, she had been reduced to a public spectacle, her marital prospects obliterated by torn netting and cruel laughter. Now a duke, a real duke, not some impoverished title holder seeking to refill his coffers, stood before her offering not just rescue, but purpose. I don't understand, she managed. You don't know me. Not truly. A published pamphlet and some watercolors hardly constitute grounds for marriage. I know you possess a mind that questions rather than accepts. I know you have the courage to publish ideas that challenge convention, even while hiding behind initials because society refuses to credit women with serious thought. He paused, and something almost human flickered across his severe features. I know you're still standing upright after an ordeal designed to break you, when most would have fled in tears. That tells me more about your character than a dozen chaperoned courtships ever could. Her father had begun pacing, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, hope, and calculation. The settlement terms, Your Grace. We should discuss particulars, have our solicitors draw up. The particulars are in the letter. My offer is generous to the point of absurdity, as you'll discover. I want Miss Dacre's answer, not her father's financial maneuvering. The Duke's gaze remained fixed on Lyra. Read it. Consider it. Send your response to my London residence within 3 days. 3 days? Her father sputtered. Surely such a momentous decision requires 3 days, the Duke repeated, his tone allowing no negotiation. If Miss Dacre requires more time to decide whether she wishes to bury her talents in some provincial drawing room, waiting for a lesser man to overlook her perceived deficiencies, then she is not the woman I believe her to be. He bowed again, this time with a trace of warmth in the gesture, before turning to face the assembled guests one final time. I trust you will all enjoy the remainder of your evening's entertainment, though I suspect it will seem rather dull now that you've exhausted the pleasure of tormenting the most intelligent woman in this room. Then he was gone, striding through the parted crowd with the same indifference he'd shown upon entering, leaving Lyra standing alone with a letter in her hands and the weight of 200 stares pressing against her back. The whispers began immediately, of course, but for the first time that evening, Lyra didn't hear them. The letter had arrived at dawn on the 3rd day, delivered by a courier in Islay livery who waited with the patience of stone while Lyra penned her acceptance in a hand that trembled only slightly. Now, 6 days later, she sat in a hired carriage rattling through the Scottish lowlands, watching civilization dissolve into wilderness with each turn of the wheels. Her father had remained in London, whether from relief at having discharged his duty or shame at the haste of the arrangement, she couldn't say. Her maid, sweet but simple Molly, had wept at Lyra's departure and been dismissed with a generous severance. The Duke's letter had been explicit. She was to bring no servants, no companions, nothing that tied her to her old life. You will begin anew, he had written in that precise, angular hand. The woman who arrives at Islay will be the woman you choose to become, unencumbered by the expectations of those who knew you before. The sentiment had seemed liberating in her father's cramped study. Now, passing through increasingly desolate moorland beneath a sky the color of lead, it felt more like erasure. The carriage lurched over another rut, and Lyra's hand flew to her head instinctively, checking the simple linen cap that had replaced her elaborate wigs. The Duke had included a note about that too, written with the clinical detachment of a physician. Wear what is comfortable. Islay has no use for pretense. She'd burned every wig she owned the morning after the ball, watching French horsehair and Venetian lace curl into ash in the bedroom grate. The smell had been acrid, chemical, final. Through the rain-streaked window, she watched the landscape transform from cultivated fields to wild heath. Stone walls gave way to scattered rocks. Trees grew stunted and wind-twisted, bent like penitents before some invisible force. The few villages they passed looked hunched against the elements, their inhabitants eyeing the Duke's crest on the carriage door with expressions Lyra couldn't quite read. Not hostility, precisely. Something more complicated. Resignation, perhaps. Or pity. How much farther? She called to the driver during one brief stop to change horses. The man, grizzled and weather-beaten, squinted at the darkening sky. Another day to the coast, my lady. Then the ferry to Islay, if the sea permits." He spoke with the Highland accent she was still learning to parse, rolling his ERs like distant thunder. "The Duke sent word you're expected. Though I'll warn you, miss, Islay's not London. Not by a long measure." "I'm aware," Lyra said. Though she wasn't. Not really. She knew Islay was an island off Scotland's western coast, that it had been Hearst land since the 14th century, that it was famous for whiskey and little else. But knowing facts and understanding a place were different things entirely. The driver's weathered face creased with something approaching sympathy. "Begging your pardon, miss, but awareness and experience are different creatures. The island, it changes people. The wind and the mist and the isolation. You'll either bend to it or break." He clicked his tongue at the fresh horses before she could respond, and the carriage lurched forward into the gathering dusk. That night, Lyra stayed at an inn so remote it didn't have a name, just a painted sign showing a stag. The proprietress, a stern woman with iron-gray hair, served mutton stew and oatcakes in silence. But her eyes lingered on Lyra's cap with the same uncomfortable recognition Lyra had learned to identify. The look of someone cataloging defects, assembling judgments. "You're the one marrying the Duke, then?" the woman said finally, not quite a question. "I am." The proprietress refilled Lyra's cup with something that was definitely not tea, whiskey, harsh and peaty. "You'll need that where you're going. Islay's no place for soft southern ladies." "I'm not soft," Lyra said, surprised by the edge in her own voice. The woman's expression shifted, reassessing. "Maybe not. You'll need to be hard as the rocks themselves to survive up there. The last Duchess?" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Never mind. Not my place to speak of the dead." Lyra's hand froze around her cup. "The last Duchess? Drink your whiskey, lass. You'll learn what you need to know soon enough." Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by dreams of wind-lashed shores and voices calling through mist. When dawn broke gray and cheerless, Lyra woke with the certainty that she had made a terrible mistake. She was traveling toward a man she'd met once, to an island she'd never seen, fleeing a life that had rejected her only to embrace one that might destroy her. But the carriage was already waiting, the horses stamping in the cold morning air, and turning back would mean returning to her father's house as a failure twice over. So she climbed in, wrapped herself in the traveling blanket, and watched Scotland grow wilder still. The coast, when they reached it, looked like the edge of the world. Cliffs dropped away to a churning sea the color of old iron. And the wind hit with physical force, tasting of salt and seaweed and distances beyond imagining. The ferry was a sturdy, ugly vessel, crewed by men who moved with the rolling gait of those who spent more time on water than land. "Islay," the captain said, pointing to a dark shape emerging from the mist like a sleeping giant. "The Duke's Island." As they drew closer, Lyra could make out details, soaring cliffs, narrow beaches of black sand, and rising from the interior, a sprawling structure of gray stone that seemed to have grown from the rock itself, rather than been built upon it. Hearst Castle, her new home. The mist swirled around them, thick enough to taste, and Lyra felt the isolation settle over her like a shroud. No coaches arrived here by chance, no casual visitors. The ferry ran twice weekly, weather permitting. She was crossing not just water, but into exile, however gilded. The castle grew larger as they approached, revealing itself in pieces through the shifting fog. Towers that looked medieval, newer wings in classical style, gardens that must have required Herculean effort to maintain against the constant wind. And everywhere, the sense of being watched, by the gulls wheeling overhead, by the few figures moving along the distant shore, by the castle's dark windows that reflected nothing but gray sky. "God in heaven," Lyra whispered. "What have I done?" The ferry bumped against the dock, and rough hands secured the ropes. A figure detached itself from the shadows of the landing, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakable even in silhouette. The Duke had come to meet her himself. As Lyra stepped onto the dock, her legs unsteady from the crossing, Bramwell Hurst moved forward with that same careful deliberation she remembered from the ballroom. Up close, with the wind whipping his dark hair and the mist beading on his coat, he looked less like a duke and more like some ancient king from the sagas, hard, elemental, utterly uncompromising. "Miss Dacre," he said, and his voice cut through the wind with ease. "Welcome to Islay. I trust your journey was not too arduous." "It was illuminating," she managed, though her teeth wanted to chatter from cold and nerves. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his pale eyes. "The island has that effect. Come. The castle is warmer than it looks, and you'll want to settle before nightfall. The mist grows thick after dark, and the cliffs are treacherous for those who don't know the paths." He offered his arm with the same formal courtesy he'd shown in London. But here, with the wild sea behind them and the isolated fortress ahead, the gesture felt less like rescue and more like a jailer welcoming a new prisoner. Lyra placed her hand on his sleeve and let him guide her up the steep path toward Hurst Castle, each step taking her farther from everything she had known, deeper into a future she could no longer predict or control. The mist closed behind them like a door. The wedding had been conducted in the castle's chapel with only the minister, 2 witnesses pulled from the household staff, and the sound of wind howling against ancient stone. No flowers, no music. No pretense that this was anything other than a legal contract between 2 people fleeing different varieties of judgment. Lyra had worn a simple dress of dove-gray silk, mourning colors, she realized too late, though perhaps that was apt. She was burying her old life, after all. The Duke had appeared in formal dress that sat uncomfortably on his broad frame, and throughout the brief ceremony, his expression remained as impenetrable as the castle walls themselves. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister intoned, his Highland accent thickening the words into something ancient and binding. The Duke had kissed her hand rather than her lips, a gesture of courtesy that felt more like restraint. And then they had signed the documents that made her the Duchess of Islay in the eyes of God and law alike. Now, hours later, Lyra stood in what the housekeeper had called the Duke's private library, surrounded by books that climbed to a ceiling lost in shadow. A fire burned in the massive hearth, but its warmth couldn't penetrate the chill that had settled in her bones. Through the windows, she could see nothing but darkness and the occasional spray of sea foam illuminated by the castle's lights. The door opened, and Bramwell entered carrying a decanter and 2 glasses. He'd removed his formal coat, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows in a gesture that seemed shockingly intimate after the day's stiff formality. "I thought you might need this," he said, pouring amber liquid into both glasses. "It's distilled here on the island. Rather stronger than what you're accustomed to in London, I suspect." Lyra accepted the glass with trembling hands, the whiskey's fumes sharp enough to make her eyes water. She drank anyway, needing the burn to ground her in the moment. "I should tell you something," she began, the words tumbling out before courage could desert her. "Before this goes any further. Before you, before we consummate the marriage?" He settled into a leather chair near the fire, his long legs stretched before him. "I'm aware that's the traditional expectation for a wedding night." I need you to understand what you've actually married." Lyra set down her glass and reached for her cap with fingers that had gone numb. This was the moment. The revelation that had destroyed her engagement to Pembroke, that had made her a laughingstock in London. Better to have it done now, quickly, like lancing a wound. She pulled the cap free, and her sparse hair, what little remained, caught the firelight. Patches of scalp showed pale against the thin strands, the evidence of the fever that had ravaged her laid bare. "There," she said, her voice brittle. "Now you know. The deception you've bound yourself to. I understand if you wish to seek an annulment. The marriage hasn't been consummated. Your solicitors could likely—" "Stop!" The word cut through her spiraling panic. Bramwell rose from his chair with careful deliberation and crossed to where she stood. Up close, she could see flecks of gold in his gray eyes. Could smell whiskey and something else, peat smoke perhaps, or the sea. "Do you truly believe I didn't know?" Lyra's breath caught. "How could you possibly—" "I make it my business to know things before I commit to them. I had reports on you long before I attended that wretched ball." He gestured to her head with clinical detachment. "Alopecia resulting from severe fever, likely typhus or scarlet fever. Your physicians were incompetent fools who attributed it to feminine hysteria and prescribed rest, when what you actually needed was proper nutrition and time for your body to recover from the trauma." She stared at him, the world tilting again. "You knew. All this time you knew, and you still wanted to marry you?" "Yes." He moved back to the fire, and for the first time since she'd met him, something approaching uncertainty crossed his features. "Though my reasons were perhaps more selfish than you imagine." He began unbuttoning his shirt with methodical precision, and Lyra's face flushed hot. "Your Grace, I don't think—" "I'm not seducing you, Miss Dacre." "Duchess," he corrected himself. "I'm showing you why I needed to marry someone who understands what it means to be reduced to a single, visible flaw." He pulled the shirt over his head, and Lyra's protest died unspoken. His torso was a map of violence. Scars crisscrossed his chest and abdomen, some thin and surgical, others thick and ropey, like rope burns. The worst ran from his right shoulder down to his hip, a twisted mass of tissue that must have taken months to heal. "Carriage accident," he said, his voice stripped of inflection. "I was 16. The carriage went off a cliff road not far from here. My father died instantly. My mother followed 3 days later. I survived. But—" he gestured to the scars with something approaching disgust. "The physician said I was lucky, that I should be grateful to be alive." Lyra found her voice, though it emerged barely above a whisper. "You don't feel lucky. I feel like a curiosity, a grotesque. Every physician in London has examined me, written papers on my remarkable survival, discussed my scars in medical journals as if I'm a specimen rather than a man." He pulled his shirt back on, his movements sharp with suppressed anger. "The last woman my mother arranged for me to court took one look at my back during a summer swim and fainted. When she recovered, she claimed she felt ill-equipped to manage such visible evidence of tragedy." "That's unconscionable," Lyra breathed. "That's society." He turned to face her fully. "Which is why I needed someone who has already been judged and found wanting by their standards. Someone who won't recoil from imperfection because she's been condemned for her own." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, and Lyra felt the pieces of the puzzle rearranging themselves into a picture she hadn't anticipated. This wasn't rescue. It was alliance. A protection pact, she said slowly. You and I against their judgment. More than that. Bramwell moved to the desk and retrieved a leather folder, which he handed to her. I meant what I said about the agricultural reforms. I'm building something here. A model community where worth is measured by contribution rather than appearance. But London society watches everything I do, waiting for me to fail. To prove that a damaged Duke cannot possibly manage his responsibilities. Lyra opened the folder to find detailed plans, not just for crop rotation, but for tenant housing, schools, a medical clinic. Pages of careful calculations and projections, all in that same precise handwriting from his letters. I need a partner who can think, he continued, who can help me build this without caring what the Cartwright Harridan or her ilk think of our methods. Someone who has already lost society's approval and therefore has nothing left to lose. And the marriage itself? Lyra asked, surprised by her own boldness. The physical aspect? His expression softened almost imperceptibly. I won't demand what you're unwilling to give. We can be partners first, and if something more develops naturally, then we'll address it. But I'm not in the habit of forcing myself on unwilling women, regardless of legal entitlements. Lyra looked down at the plans in her hands, at the evidence of work that would take years to complete. Then she looked at the man before her, scarred, isolated, offering not love, but purpose. I accept, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Your protection pact, your partnership, all of it. Something flickered in Bramwell's eyes that might have been relief. He raised his glass. To alliances forged in necessity. Lyra raised hers to meet it. And to proving them wrong. The glasses chimed together, the sound clear and sharp as a vow spoken in the chapel that morning. Outside, the wind continued its assault on the castle walls. But inside the library, surrounded by books and firelight and the beginning of something neither of them could yet name, Lyra felt the first stirring of something she hadn't experienced since before the fever. Hope. The first week passed in a blur of wind and routine. Lyra took her meals in the small dining room overlooking the sea, pored over Bramwell's agricultural plans in the library, and slept alone in a bedroom connected to the Duke's chambers by a door that remained firmly locked. They were polite strangers sharing a massive stone prison, circling each other with careful courtesy that felt more exhausting than honesty. On the 8th morning, Lyra woke to find the mist had lifted for the first time since her arrival, revealing Islay in unexpected detail. The island was larger than she'd imagined, with rolling hills that dropped to rocky beaches, tenant farms scattered across the interior, and in the distance, the distinctive pagoda-shaped buildings of whiskey distilleries, sending thin streams of smoke into the clear air. She dressed quickly and descended to the breakfast room, only to find it empty save for Mrs. McKay, the housekeeper who ran the household with iron efficiency. His Grace left early, my lady, the woman said, her Highland accent still challenging Lyra's comprehension. He's gone to the South Farms to inspect the new drainage system. I see. Lyra felt an unexpected stab of disappointment. She'd planned to ask Bramwell about the tenant school proposals, had spent half the night drafting suggestions for the curriculum. When will he return? Not before nightfall, I expect. The South Farms are a fair distance. Mrs. McKay hesitated, then added, though if you're looking for occupation, my lady, there's the East Wing. His Grace said you were to have access to anywhere in the castle. Something in the woman's tone suggested this was more significant than a simple statement of fact. The East Wing? It's kept locked, mostly. But His Grace left word. Mrs. McKay produced a heavy iron key from her apron pocket. He said if you asked, I was to show you. 20 minutes later, Lyra stood before a door at the end of a long corridor she'd assumed led to unused guest chambers. Mrs. McKay fitted the key to the lock, and the mechanism turned with a well-oiled click that suggested regular use despite the housekeeper's implications of abandonment. "I'll leave you to it then," Mrs. McKay said, pressing the key into Lyra's hand. "Ring if you need anything, though there's none of the staff allowed in this wing. His Grace's orders." The door swung open to reveal not the dusty abandonment Lyra expected, but a corridor flooded with light from tall windows. The air smelled of herbs and something astringent, carbolic acid perhaps, or strong spirits used for cleaning. Lyra moved forward, her curiosity overcoming caution. The first room she encountered was clearly a laboratory. Glass beakers and copper distillation equipment covered every surface, some still bearing the residue of recent use. Shelves lined the walls, filled with bottles labeled in Latin, tinctures and compounds, their contents ranging from clear to murky brown. A microscope sat on a desk near the window, and beside it, leather-bound journals filled with notes in Bramwell's precise hand. She opened the nearest journal, scanning entries that read like medical case studies. Patient 17, male, age 43, presenting with tremors in the right hand following industrial accident. Treatment: extract of willow bark combined with... The technical language defeated her, but the intent was clear. These were records of people being treated for ailments. The next room contained something that made her breath catch. A fully equipped surgical theater, smaller than those she'd glimpsed during a charity visit to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, but no less sophisticated. An operating table dominated the center, surrounded by instrument trays that gleamed with recent polishing. Cabinets held bandages, sutures, bottles of laudanum, and chloroform. "What in God's name?" Lyra whispered. She moved deeper into the wing, finding room after room dedicated to medical research. One held a small library of medical texts in English, German, and French. Another contained detailed anatomical drawings, some printed, others hand-sketched with meticulous attention to musculature and skeletal structure. A third room held what appeared to be beds, 6 of them arranged hospital-style, each with a small table bearing a water pitcher and glass. The beds were empty now, but clearly used. The linens were fresh, but showed the wear of regular washing. Personal items sat on the bedside tables, a child's wooden toy, a woman's handkerchief, a man's pipe. "You found it then." Lyra spun to find Bramwell standing in the doorway, still wearing his riding clothes, mud splattered to his knees. She'd been so absorbed in her exploration she hadn't heard him approach. "I thought you were at the South Farms," she managed. "I was. Mrs. McKay sent word you'd asked for the key. I thought I should be here when you..." He gestured vaguely at the room. "When you discovered this." "What is this?" Lyra asked, though the evidence surrounded her. "A private hospital? An infirmary? A research facility? A refuge?" Bramwell moved into the room, running his hand along one of the bed frames. "I started it 3 years ago, after the accident. When the London physicians were done cataloging my injuries and writing their papers, I began to wonder about all the others. The people with conditions too rare or too unfashionable to warrant medical attention. The ones society discards because their ailments are inconvenient or unsightly." He crossed to the window, looking out over the island. "There's a tenant farmer on the North Shore whose daughter has seizures. The physicians in Edinburgh said she was possessed, recommended exorcism or institutionalization. I've been treating her with carefully measured doses of bromide salts. She hasn't had a severe episode in 6 months." Lyra felt her throat tighten. "You're treating people." "I'm learning to treat people. There's a difference." He turned back to her, his expression guarded. I studied under a physician in Edinburgh for 2 years, anonymously, paying him handsomely to overlook my lack of formal credentials. I'm not qualified to practice medicine legally, but I can read research, conduct experiments, try to help those who have nowhere else to turn. The scars on your chest, Lyra said slowly, understanding blooming. Some of them are surgical, aren't they? Not from the accident. A muscle jumped in his jaw. The physicians who treated me after the crash were butchers. They left me with constant pain, restricted movement. 3 years ago, I found a surgeon in Germany willing to attempt corrective procedures. Experimental work. Dangerous, but he shrugged. I could barely lift my right arm above my shoulder before. Now I can ride, work, function. It gave me my life back. And you wanted to give that to others. I wanted to do something useful with the privilege of survival. His voice roughened. Do you know how many people suffer from conditions that could be managed, even cured, if anyone bothered to study them? But medicine focuses on diseases that affect wealthy men. No one researches women's ailments or conditions that strike the poor or things like hair loss from fever, Lyra finished softly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. There's a physician in Vienna, Bramwell said carefully, who's been studying alopecia. He believes it's connected to nutritional deficiencies and immune system responses. I've been corresponding with him, acquiring his research. He paused. I wanted to tell you, but I thought it would seem like I was trying to fix you. That I saw you as another patient rather than your wife, Lyra supplied. Rather than a person with agency to make her own choices about her body and her treatment. Lyra moved through the infirmary, trailing her fingers along the empty beds, imagining them filled with the discarded and desperate. A farmer's daughter with seizures, a tenant with tremors. How many others had found their way to this hidden wing, seeking help from a duke who understood rejection? I want to help, she said, turning to face him. With the research, the treatments, all of it. Bramwell's expression shifted, surprise breaking through his usual control. You don't have to. I want to. You said you needed a partner for your agricultural work. Why not this as well? She gestured at the surrounding equipment. I can read, I can learn, and I can certainly assist with patients. God knows I understand what it's like to be stared at as a medical curiosity. It's not without risk, he warned. If London society discovers what I'm doing here, they'll call it madness. Playing at physician. They'll use it as evidence that I'm unfit to hold my title. Let them try. Lyra felt something fierce kindle in her chest. You offered me a protection pact, partnership. This seems rather fundamental to who you are. If I'm to stand beside you, I should stand beside all of you, not just the parts that breed crops and manage tenants. For a long moment, Bramwell simply looked at her, and Lyra saw the walls he'd erected begin to crack. Then, almost tentatively, he smiled. The first genuine smile she'd seen from him since their wedding. There's a girl in the village, he said, about your age. She lost most of her hair to scarlet fever 2 years ago. She refuses to leave her cottage now, convinced she's cursed. I thought perhaps, if you were willing. I'll speak with her, Lyra said without hesitation. Tomorrow, if the weather holds. Thank you. The words were simple, but weighted with something deeper than gratitude. As they stood in the infirmary surrounded by the evidence of Bramwell's secret war against medical indifference, Lyra realized their protection pact had evolved into something more complex. They weren't just sheltering each other from society's judgment. They were building something that might actually matter. The girl's name was Kenna, and she lived in a stone cottage so close to the cliff's edge that Lyra could hear the waves crashing against the rocks below. When Mrs. McKay knocked on the weathered door, it opened only a crack, revealing a sliver of pale face and one suspicious eye. "Go away," came the muffled voice. "I told you, I don't need the Duke's charity." "It's not charity," Bramwell said from behind Lyra. "It's a visit from the Duchess. She's come to meet you." The door opened slightly wider, and Lyra caught a glimpse of rough linen wrapped around the girl's head in a makeshift turban. "The Duchess? Why would she?" "Because we have something in common," Lyra said gently. She reached up and removed her own cap, letting Kenna see the sparse patches and exposed scalp. "May we come in?" The door swung open fully, revealing a girl perhaps 19, her face gaunt with the kind of isolation that came from choosing invisibility over mockery. Behind her the cottage was neat but spare, a single room with a hearth, a narrow bed, and shelves holding the implements of some craft. Lyra spotted half-finished baskets woven from willow and rush. "You're—" Kenna stared at Lyra's head, then at the Duke standing calmly in her doorway as if this were a normal social call. "They said you were beautiful. A London lady." "They lied about the beautiful part," Lyra said, moving into the cottage uninvited, sensing that formality would only make this harder. "Though I was indeed a London lady, until the fever." Kenna's hand drifted to her own covered head. "Scarlet fever. 2 years ago. It took my hair and my betrothed in the same month. Jamie said he couldn't marry a woman who looked like a plucked chicken." Her voice cracked on the vulgarity, clearly repeating words that had been used to wound her. "Men who judge women by their hair aren't worth the air they breathe," Lyra said sharply. She gestured to Bramwell. "Present company accepted, obviously." Despite herself, Kenna's lips twitched toward a smile. "His Grace has been kind. Sent the physician from the mainland, had treatments brought from Edinburgh. Nothing helped. That's because Edinburgh physicians are useless," said a new voice from the cottage doorway. Lyra turned to find an old woman standing in the threshold, ancient enough that her face had collapsed into a geography of wrinkles, her eyes sharp as flint despite their roomy appearance. She wore layers of shawls and carried a basket that smelled of earth and growing things. "Moira," Bramwell said, and Lyra heard respect in his voice. "I wondered if you'd come." "Did you now?" The old woman shuffled into the cottage with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere and answered to no one. "You send word that the new Duchess has the spirit wilt, and you think I wouldn't come to see for myself?" Her eyes fixed on Lyra with unsettling intensity. "Take off that cap properly, girl. Let me see what we're dealing with." "I beg your pardon?" Lyra bristled at the imperious tone. "Moira MacLeod," Bramwell explained. "She's been the island's healer for longer than anyone can remember. She knows more about ailments than any physician with fancy credentials." "Flattery won't make me work faster," Moira said, though she looked pleased. She set her basket down and approached Lyra with gnarled hands outstretched. "Now then, let me look." Something in the woman's manner, not unkind, simply matter of fact, made Lyra comply. She removed her cap entirely and bent her head, allowing Moira's fingers to probe her scalp with surprising gentleness. Spirit wilt, as I thought." The body turned against itself after a great shock. Moira's fingers found the spots where hair still grew. "But see here? The roots live. They're just sleeping, starved of what they need." "The physician said it was hysteria," Lyra said, "that my feminine constitution couldn't handle the fever's strain." Moira made a sound of pure disgust. Physicians. They wouldn't know spirit wilt if it grew on their own heads. This is the body crying out for iron and minerals. Your blood ran thin after the fever, and everything not essential, hair, monthly courses, warmth in your extremities, the body sacrificed to keep your heart beating. She turned to Kenna. You too, child. Show me. Reluctantly, Kenna unwound her turban. Her hair loss was more advanced than Lyra's, with only a few struggling patches remaining. Moira nodded, as if confirming a diagnosis. Worse than the Duchess, but not beyond help. The scarlet fever took more from you. And you've been hiding in this cottage eating nothing but bannocks and tea, I'll wager. Starving yourself of what little iron you could get. I can't go to the market, Kenna whispered. The way they stare. So you slowly kill yourself to spare their delicate sensibilities? Moira's tone sharpened. Foolish girl. Your body is a garden that needs tending, not a source of shame. She returned to her basket and began pulling out items, small bottles of oil that caught the light, packages wrapped in cloth, bundles of dried herbs that filled the cottage with complex, earthy scents. This, she held up a dark bottle, is oil pressed from the seeds of evening primrose. You'll massage it into your scalp each night. And this, a wrapped package, is liver from the sheep, fresh as this morning. You'll eat it twice weekly, fried with onions if you must disguise the taste. Lyra tried not to grimace. Liver? Rich in iron, girl. Your blood needs building up. Along with that, you'll take nettle tea daily, and once a week, a tonic I'll prepare from kelp gathered from the North Beaches. Moira fixed both women with a stern look. But none of this works if you stay hidden away, letting fear eat at you. Stress and isolation feed the spirit wilt as surely as poor diet. You're saying we need to... what? Parade ourselves before the village? Lyra asked. I'm saying you need to live as if you're already whole. Moira began dividing her supplies between two piles. The body follows the spirit's lead. If you act defeated, your body accepts defeat. If you act as though you deserve health and life and sunlight, your body begins to believe it too. Bramwell, who had been watching silently from near the door, spoke up. Moira helped me after the accident. When the Edinburgh physician said I'd never regain full use of my arm, she had me working with weighted stones and swimming in the sea caves, convinced my body would remember what it was capable of. And did it work? Kenna asked. He rolled his shoulder in demonstration, the movement fluid and unrestricted. Eventually, though I suspect the sea cave swimming was partly Moira's revenge for my complaining. The cold water is medicinal, Moira said primly, but her eyes glinted with humor. Speaking of which, both of you, she pointed at Lyra and Kenna, will benefit from daily walks along the shore. The sea air carries iodine and minerals your bodies need, and the exercise will help your blood move properly. Lyra looked at Kenna, seeing her own uncertainty reflected back. Together? She suggested. I confess I don't yet know the safe paths along the cliffs. Something cautiously hopeful flickered across Kenna's face. I could show you. If you truly don't mind being seen with me. Why would I mind? Lyra asked, genuinely puzzled. We're fighting the same battle. We might as well be allies. Moira began packing up her basket, satisfied with whatever she'd set in motion. I'll return in a fortnight to check your progress. In the meantime, use the oils every night. Eat the foods I've specified, and for heaven's sake, stop hiding as if you've committed a crime. Your hair fell out. You didn't murder anyone. Some days it feels like I murdered my old self, Lyra admitted quietly. The old woman's expression softened. Then consider this a resurrection. You're not bringing back who you were, you're becoming who you were meant to be. The fever burned away the excess. Now we build you back stronger. She shuffled toward the door, then paused. One more thing. When the hair begins to grow back, and it will, don't expect it to return as it was. The body remembers trauma. Sometimes the new growth comes in different, curlier or straighter or another color entirely. Don't mourn what was, celebrate what is. After she'd gone, the cottage felt larger somehow, as if Moira had taken some invisible weight with her. Kenna touched her wrapped head tentatively. Do you think it's true? That it could actually work? His Grace seems to trust her, Lyra said, looking to Bramwell. He nodded. Moira's healed injuries and illnesses that defeated trained physicians. She sees the body as a whole system rather than isolated symptoms. If she says your hair can regrow, I'd believe her over any London doctor. That evening, back in her chambers at the castle, Lyra sat before her mirror and massaged the evening primrose oil into her scalp as instructed. The oil was thick and slightly sweet-smelling, and the massage itself felt strange, caring for a part of herself she had learned to hide and resent. Through the connecting door, she heard Bramwell moving in his own chambers. On impulse, she called out, "Your Grace?" "Bramwell," came the reply. "We're married. You might use my name." "Bramwell, then." She paused. "Thank you for today. For Moira." A long silence, then. "You're welcome, Lyra." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about hearing it in his deep voice, muffled by the locked door between them, made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Hope, perhaps? Or the beginning of something more dangerous. Trust. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a mainland courier who looked exhausted from the journey. Bramwell opened it at breakfast, and Lyra watched the color drain from his face as he read. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her tea. "My mother." He handed her the letter, his jaw tight. "She's arriving tomorrow, with the Bishop of Edinburgh and her solicitor." Lyra scanned the elegant script, each word dripping with aristocratic displeasure. The Dowager Duchess of Islay had learned of her son's hasty and unsuitable marriage, and was coming to assess the situation personally and ensure the family's interests were properly protected. She didn't attend the wedding, Lyra said, stating the obvious. She was in Bath. I didn't inform her until after the ceremony was concluded. Bramwell rose and moved to the window, his shoulders rigid. I should have known she'd come eventually. I'd hoped for more time. Time for what? For her to accept the inevitable. For me to present you as an established fact rather than a decision still subject to negotiation. He turned back to her, and Lyra saw something she hadn't seen before in his eyes. Not quite fear, but close. Apprehension. My mother is formidable. She's been trying to control my choice of bride since I turned 21. Every woman she's selected has been terrified of my scars and relieved when I didn't pursue them. And now you've chosen your own wife, Lyra said slowly. One she knows nothing about, except that I was rejected by London society. One she'll see as confirmation of my poor judgment and damaged faculties. Bramwell's laugh was bitter. She's been arguing for years that the accident affected my mind as well as my body. This will only fuel her conviction. The next day dawned gray and blustery, as if the weather itself conspired to match the dowager's temperament. Lyra dressed with particular care, choosing a deep blue morning gown that Bramwell had commissioned from the island's seamstress, simpler than London fashion, but well-made and flattering. She arranged her cap with meticulous attention, ensuring every thin strand was concealed. "You look like you're preparing for battle," Bramwell observed when she met him in the entrance hall. "Aren't I?" The carriages arrived precisely at noon, 3 of them, laden with trunks and servants and the full weight of ducal disapproval. The Dowager Duchess emerged from the first carriage like a queen descending from a throne, her black traveling dress and severe expression making her look carved from obsidian. She was beautiful still, despite her 60 years, tall and straight-backed, with the same pale gray eyes as her son, but none of his warmth. Those eyes swept over Lyra with the assessing gaze of someone pricing livestock at market. "Bramwell," she said, extending her hand without moving toward him. "You look well. Island life continues to agree with you." "Mother." He kissed her gloved hand with formal courtesy. "May I present my wife, Lyra, Duchess of Islay." "Duchess." The Dowager's tone made the title sound temporary. "How unexpected to finally meet you." Lyra curtsied with the precision Lady Agatha had drilled into her years ago. "Your Grace, welcome to Islay." "Yes, my island, where my late husband is buried, where I gave birth to my son." The Dowager swept past them into the castle, her entourage following like a military procession. "I trust you've kept my chambers ready, Bramwell?" "I shall be staying indefinitely." The first 2 days passed in tense civility. The Dowager inspected the castle, finding fault with everything from the menu to the state of the linens. She brought the bishop to dinner and monopolized conversation with talk of Edinburgh society and people Lyra had never met. The solicitor, a pinch-faced man named Cranston, lurked in corners making notes. Lyra kept to her routine: morning walks with Kenna, afternoons in the infirmary helping Bramwell catalog medical supplies, evenings reviewing agricultural reports. She applied Moira's oils religiously and ate liver despite its revolting texture. And she watched the Dowager watching her, waiting for the strike she knew was coming. It came on the 3rd evening. Lyra was in the library when the Dowager entered, dismissing the servant who'd been tending the fire with an imperious wave. The door clicked shut, and they were alone. "We should speak plainly," the Dowager said, settling into the chair Bramwell usually occupied. "Woman to woman, without the pretense of pleasantries." "I would welcome plain speaking, Your Grace." "Good." The Dowager folded her hands in her lap. "You are not suitable to be the Duchess of Islay. Surely you must realize this." Lyra felt the words like a slap, but kept her expression neutral. "Your son believed otherwise." "My son is not thinking clearly. He has been isolated on this island, playing at agriculture and medicine, growing stranger by the year. When I heard he'd married some disgraced London girl in a secret ceremony, I knew his judgment had finally failed completely." "Disgraced?" Lyra's voice sharpened. "I committed no disgrace beyond having the misfortune to fall ill." "You deceived Lord Pembroke with false hair and false pretenses. The scandal reached even Bath." The Dowager's eyes glittered. "Did you think my son wouldn't hear of it? He sought you out precisely because you were desperate, easy to manipulate, grateful for any offer." "That's not—" "Let me finish." The Dowager rose and crossed to the desk, where she opened her reticule and withdrew a leather folder. "I am prepared to be generous. More generous than you deserve, frankly. But I wish to resolve this matter quickly and quietly." She laid the folder before Lyra. Inside were legal documents and a bank draft that made Lyra's breath catch. £10,000. More money than her father had lost to his creditors. More money than she'd ever imagined possessing. "An annulment has already been prepared," the Dowager continued. "The marriage has not been consummated. Bramwell confirmed as much. though he refused to explain why. The bishop is prepared to grant a dispensation based on irregularities in the ceremony. You will sign these documents, take this money, and leave Islay within the week. Lyra stared at the bank draft, her mind reeling. £10,000 could buy a cottage somewhere quiet. Security, independence. She could live comfortably for decades, free from the burden of being a duchess she had no training to be. You could start over, the dowager said, her voice almost kind. Away from the scrutiny of society. Away from the weight of a title you're not equipped to bear. You could be comfortable, Lyra. Safe. Safe from what? From the inevitable failure. The dowager's expression hardened. You cannot possibly believe this marriage will succeed. You have no connections, no fortune, no accomplishments that matter in our world. And you have... She gestured vaguely at Lyra's cap. Your condition. Bramwell may tolerate it now out of misplaced pity, but eventually he'll require an heir. When that time comes, do you truly think he'll want a wife who appears at social functions looking like a what? Lyra stood, fury finally breaking through her control. Say it. Whatever vile thing you're thinking. The dowager's lip curled. Like a woman who has been marked by illness. Damaged. Unfit to represent one of England's oldest families. I see. Lyra moved around the desk, placing herself between the dowager and the door. You're not concerned about my suitability. You're concerned that having a visibly imperfect duchess will remind everyone that your son is visibly imperfect as well. That the scars you've been trying to hide behind isolation and eccentricity will be impossible to ignore when his wife's flaws are equally visible. The dowager's face flushed. How dare you? How dare I speak the truth? Your son is brilliant, capable, and doing more good on this island than most dukes accomplish in a lifetime. But you've treated him like a shameful secret since the accident. You've tried to control his life because you couldn't control the carriage that went off the cliff. You know nothing about what I've endured. I know you've made him feel like his scars are something to hide. That he's somehow less because his body bears the evidence of survival. Lyra's voice shook. I won't do that. I won't treat him like he's damaged goods in need of management. The dowager drew herself up to her full height. The annulment will proceed with or without your cooperation. Bramwell may have married you, but he's not strong enough to resist me. He never has been. Then you don't know your son as well as you think. The library door opened, and Bramwell entered. From the look on his face, he'd heard at least part of the conversation. Mother, he said quietly, I believe you should leave. Bramwell, be reasonable. Leave, now. The dowager gathered her documents with shaking hands. You're making a terrible mistake, both of you. This marriage will destroy you. Perhaps, Bramwell said, but it will be our mistake to make. After she'd gone, the silence in the library felt immense. Lyra realized she was trembling, the confrontation having drained something vital from her. I'm sorry, Bramwell said. I should have warned you more specifically about what she'd attempt. £10,000, Lyra heard herself say. She offered me £10,000 to leave. I know. She tried the same tactic 3 years ago with Lady Caroline. Offered her $20,000 not to marry me. His smile was bleak. Caroline took the money. Lyra looked at the bank draft, still lying on the desk. Enough to buy freedom from all of this. Enough to start over somewhere no one knew her name or her shame. I didn't take it, she said. I know. Bramwell moved closer, and for the first time since their wedding, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused from work. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. She's not going to give up easily." "No," he agreed. "She won't. But neither will we." 6 weeks after Moira's first visit, Lyra woke to find something strange on her pillow. Several strands of hair, thicker and darker than any that had fallen during the fever. She sat up, her heart pounding, and moved to the mirror with trembling hands. There, at her temples and along the crown of her head, new growth had emerged. Not the fine, wispy hair that had struggled to survive before, but substantial strands with body and strength. She ran her fingers over them carefully, hardly daring to believe. A knock at the connecting door made her jump. "Lyra? Are you awake?" She threw open the door without thinking, forgetting her cap, forgetting everything but the need to share this small miracle. Bramwell stood in his shirt sleeves, clearly having just risen himself, and his eyes widened slightly at her uncovered head. "It's growing," she said, her voice breaking. "Look. It's actually growing." He moved closer, and she felt the warmth of him as he examined her scalp with the clinical attention he brought to his medical work. But his fingers, when they touched the new growth, were gentle, reverent almost. "The oils are working," he said softly, "and Moira's dietary regimen. Your body is rebuilding itself." "I didn't think it would actually happen." Lyra laughed, and the sound came out half-sob. "I thought I'd be wearing caps and wigs for the rest of my life." "Would that have been so terrible?" Bramwell asked, not unkindly. "If it hadn't grown back?" The question stopped her. A month ago, she would have said yes immediately, that a life without her hair restored would be a half-life, a compromise, a constant reminder of loss. But now, standing in the morning light with Bramwell's steady gaze on her face rather than her scalp, she found her answer shifting. "No," she said slowly. "Not terrible. Just different." She met his eyes. "I've done more in the past 6 weeks than I did in years of London seasons. The infirmary work, the agricultural planning, even just walking the cliffs with Kenna. I've felt useful, valued for what I can do rather than how I look." "You are valued," Bramwell said, and something in his tone made heat rise to her cheeks. "Your hair or no hair. Though I'm glad if the regrowth brings you joy." It did bring joy. That was the surprising part. As the weeks passed and the growth continued, Lyra found herself checking the mirror each morning with genuine delight. The new hair came in darker than her original blonde, with a curl she'd never had before. Moira's prediction had been accurate. The fever had changed her, and the change was written in every new strand. But the joy wasn't about beauty or marriageability or any of the things that had driven her desperate attempts to conceal her condition in London. It was simpler than that. Her body, which had betrayed her so completely, was healing, proving itself resilient, coming back stronger. And as her hair grew, so did other things. The walks with Kenna became longer, ranging farther along the coast as Lyra's stamina improved. Color returned to her cheeks from wind and sun, the persistent chill she'd carried since the fever began to fade. She found herself hungry at mealtimes, eating the liver and nettle dishes without complaint, even beginning to enjoy them. "You look different," Kenna observed one afternoon as they picked their way along the rocky beach. The girl's own hair had begun regrowing as well, a soft dark fuzz covering her scalp. She'd stopped wearing her turban 2 weeks ago, and though villagers still stared, she met their gazes with newfound defiance. "Different how?" "Alive," Kenna said simply. "When you first arrived, you looked like a ghost. Beautiful, but hollow." Now you look like you actually live in your body instead of just haunting it." The observation stayed with Lyra through the day. Through her afternoon in the infirmary where she and Bramwell treated a tenant farmer's infected hand. Through dinner where she actually contributed to conversation instead of pushing food around her plate. That night, as she applied the evening primrose oil, now as much ritual as treatment, she studied her reflection properly. Kenna was right. She did look different. The woman staring back had color in her cheeks and clarity in her eyes. Her new hair curled around her face in a way that softened her features, made her look less like a porcelain doll and more like an actual human woman. The changes weren't dramatic. She wouldn't be mistaken for a great beauty, but they were real. She was real, in a way she hadn't been in London. A week later, Moira returned for her promised inspection. The old woman examined both Lyra and Kenna with satisfaction, making approving noises as she probed their scalps. "Good, good. The spirit wilt is breaking. Your blood is strengthening." She stepped back, surveying them both. "You'll want to continue the treatments for another 2 months at least. But the worst is past. The hair will continue coming in thicker." "Will it ever be as it was before?" Lyra asked, not sure herself if she wanted that answer to be yes or no. Moira tilted her head, considering. "Does a tree that survives a lightning strike grow back exactly as it was?" "No, it grows different, sometimes stronger for the scarring. You're not recovering your old hair, girl. You're growing new hair. Better hair, from a body that's learned what it needs to survive." After Moira left, Bramwell found Lyra in the library, where she'd been reviewing the latest medical journals he'd acquired from Edinburgh. He carried a small wooden box, which he set on the desk before her. "I had this made for you," he said, with uncharacteristic hesitance. "You don't have to use it if you don't want to." Inside the box lay a collection of hair combs, not the elaborate decorative pieces ladies wore to balls, but simpler, more practical designs. Some were plain tortoiseshell, others carved with Celtic knots. All were sized for someone with less hair to arrange. "I thought," Bramwell continued when she didn't speak, "as your hair grows back, you might want options beyond caps. These are designed to work with shorter hair, to complement rather than conceal." Lyra lifted one of the combs, feeling the smooth polish of the wood. "These are beautiful." "The island carver made them. I showed him your hair, I hope that's not too presumptuous, and he designed pieces that would suit the new growth pattern." Bramwell shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I wanted you to have choices. If you prefer caps, that's perfectly fine. But if you wanted to try something else..." She set down the comb and looked at him properly. This man who had married her when no one else would, who had given her purpose when she felt worthless, who noticed her hair growth patterns and commissioned custom combs without being asked. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate for what she was feeling. "Not just for these, for everything. You don't need to thank me. You've held up your end of our bargain admirably. The infirmary runs more smoothly with your help, and your suggestions on the tenant school curriculum were..." "Bramwell." She stood, closing the distance between them. "This stopped being just a bargain weeks ago. You know that, don't you?" He went very still, his gray eyes searching her face. "What is it, then?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But it's more than a protection pact between two damaged people. At least, it is for me." "For me as well," he said quietly. His hand came up, hovering near her face as if he wanted to touch her, but didn't quite dare. "You've become essential. I look for you in the morning, I save interesting passages from journals to share with you. I think about how you'll react to things before I encounter them." "That sounds suspiciously like affection," Lyra said, her heart hammering. "It is affection." His fingers finally made contact, brushing the new growth at her temple with such gentleness it made her throat tight. "Possibly more than affection, though I'm out of practice at identifying such things." "Then we'll figure it out together," she said. "What it is, what we are." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his severe features into something approaching beauty. "I'd like that." That night, for the first time since their wedding, the connecting door between their chambers remained unlocked. Neither crossed it, not yet, but the possibility hung in the air like a promise. Lyra lay in bed, running her fingers through her new growth, feeling the thick curls spring back against her palm. The hair was growing, yes, but that felt almost incidental now to the larger transformation. The one that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with becoming someone who could accept love without believing it was contingent on perfection. She had been so certain her worth was tied to her hair that without it, she was nothing but damaged goods. But here on this isolated island, working beside a scarred duke to heal the discarded and build something meaningful, she'd discovered her worth had been there all along. The hair was just hair. The woman beneath it, resilient, capable, increasingly content. She was what mattered. And for the first time since the fever, Lyra fell asleep without mourning what she'd lost, focusing instead on what she was becoming. The legal papers arrived on a morning that had begun with rare sunshine, the kind of crystalline autumn day that made Islay look like something from a painting, rather than the windswept outpost it usually resembled. Lyra had been in the infirmary cataloging new medical supplies when Bramwell appeared in the doorway, his face carved from stone, a thick sheaf of documents in his hand. "She's done it," he said without preamble. "My mother has petitioned the Court of Session in Edinburgh to have me declared mentally incompetent." The bottle of laudanum Lyra had been holding slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor in a spray of brown glass and acrid liquid. "What?" He handed her the documents, and she read with growing horror. The Dowager's solicitors had assembled a case arguing that Bramwell's erratic behavior following the carriage accident, his isolation on Islay, his obsessive medical research, and most damningly, his hasty marriage to a diseased woman of no standing, demonstrated a mind unfit to manage a dukedom and its attendant responsibilities. "She's claiming you're bewitched," Lyra read aloud, disbelief sharpening her voice. "That I used feminine arts to ensnare you while you were in a weakened mental state. This is insanity. It's strategy." Bramwell's voice was flat, emotionless, but Lyra could see the fury banked behind his eyes. "If she can prove me incompetent, she becomes the estate's guardian. She controls everything, the land, the finances, the title's reputation. She can annul our marriage and select a suitable bride herself. But you're not incompetent. Anyone who's seen your work, the infirmary, the agricultural reforms, none of that matters to the Court of Session. They'll ask why a duke in his right mind would sequester himself on a remote island, conducting medical experiments without credentials. Why he'd marry a woman publicly rejected by an earl, someone with a disfiguring condition, in a ceremony so hasty it appeared clandestine. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. She's been building this case for years. Every eccentric choice I've made, every deviation from expected ducal behavior, she's documented. This marriage was simply the final evidence she needed. Lyra's mind raced through the implications. What happens if she wins? The title passes to her control until such time as I'm deemed recovered, or until my death, at which point it transfers to my cousin Gerald, a man whose greatest accomplishment is drinking himself unconscious at White's 3 nights a week." Bramwell's laugh was bitter. "The irony is exquisite. She'll save the dukedom from my incompetence by handing it to an actual incompetent. There must be something we can do. Counter-petitions, character witnesses." "There is." He met her eyes directly. "We return to London. We appear before the Court of Session and prove I'm of sound mind. We show them a functional marriage between 2 rational adults, demonstrate the value of the work being done here, and dismantle her case piece by piece." The thought of returning to London made Lyra's stomach twist. The city where she'd been humiliated, rejected, reduced to a cautionary tale. The ballrooms that still whispered her name with mockery. "When?" "We leave in 3 days. The hearing is scheduled for a fortnight from now." He stood and began pacing, the controlled movement of a caged predator. "My mother is brilliant in her cruelty. She's timed this perfectly, early enough in our marriage that we can't claim years of proven stability, late enough that we can't argue it's too new to judge. What do we need to do? Present ourselves as the embodiment of respectable, rational matrimony." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Which means you'll need to look the part of a duchess. No caps, no simple island dresses. London expects a certain presentation." Lyra's hand flew to her head instinctively, to the new growth that had given her such joy but was still far from the elaborate coiffures society demanded. "My hair isn't long enough for proper styling." "I know." His expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry. I know what I'm asking. But the court will be looking for any evidence of eccentricity, anything that suggests our marriage is based on shared damage rather than sound judgment. If you appear looking damaged," she finished. "Looking like evidence of your supposed incompetence." Yes, the admission clearly pained him. "I would never ask if there were another way." The next 3 days passed in a frenzy of preparation. Bramwell sent to Edinburgh for a modiste, who arrived with trunks of fabric and the latest fashion plates, her eyes carefully neutral as she took Lyra's measurements and assessed her hair situation. "We can work with this," the woman said, fingering Lyra's new growth. "False pieces blended with your natural hair, arranged in a style that's fashionable but not so elaborate it draws attention. You'll look every inch a duchess." Lyra submitted to hours of fittings, standing motionless while silk and velvet were pinned and adjusted. The gowns were beautiful, far finer than anything she'd owned even during her first London season. But they felt like armor, heavy, restrictive, necessary. Kenna came to see her off the morning of their departure, the girl's face tight with worry. "You'll come back, won't you? You won't let them keep you there?" "I'll come back," Lyra promised, though the words felt like tempting fate. "This is my home now. Our work here isn't finished." The journey south was the reverse of Lyra's arrival, ferry to the mainland, then days in a carriage watching Scotland transform from wild to civilized. But this time Bramwell traveled with her, and they spent the hours reviewing their strategy. "The key witnesses will be character assessments," he explained, surrounded by documents. "My mother will bring physicians who examined me after the accident, society figures who can attest to my erratic withdrawal from normal social engagement. We need to counter with evidence of rational behavior and successful estate management. Who can we call? The island's factor, who can speak to the agricultural improvements and their financial success. Dr. Murray from Edinburgh, who supervised my medical studies and can testify to my competence. And you." Lyra looked up sharply. "Me? You'll need to testify about our marriage. Why you accepted my proposal, what our daily life consists of, whether I've shown any signs of mental incompetence. His jaw tightened. They'll ask invasive questions about the marriage's intimate aspects, whether I've behaved rationally in that arena. Heat flooded Lyra's face. The marriage remained unconsummated, though the unlocked door between their chambers had led to long conversations in the dark, to hands held across the space between their separate beds, to a growing intimacy that felt more significant than any physical act. What should I say? The truth. That we've built a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. That the physical side has progressed naturally. They don't need to know the specifics. He paused. Though we should probably remedy the unconsummated aspect before the hearing. If my mother's solicitors discover that detail, they'll use it as evidence of my inability to fulfill basic marital duties. The practical way he stated it should have been unromantic. But Lyra found herself considering the idea with surprising calm. Not because a court demanded it, but because the thought of that final barrier between them falling no longer frightened her. "All right," she said simply. Something flashed in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or desire carefully controlled. "We don't have to. I know. But I want to. Not just for the case, but because..." She struggled to articulate the shift that had occurred. "Because you've become my husband in every way that matters. This is just the final acknowledgement." London appeared through the carriage window like a judgment. All soot-stained buildings and crowded streets, the Thames sluggish and brown compared to Islay's clean northern seas. They took residence in the Duke's London townhouse, a Georgian edifice in Mayfair that had been closed for years and smelled of dust and disuse. The staff Bramwell had sent ahead scrambled to prepare rooms. But the house felt like a mausoleum compared to the castle's wild vitality. Lyra stood in the drawing room, surrounded by furniture covered in Holland cloth, and felt the weight of London society pressing down like a physical force. "I forgot how much I hate this city," Bramwell said, appearing beside her. "All that stone and smoke and judgment." 2 weeks, Lyra said, as much to herself as him. "We defend ourselves, win, and go home." "Home." He tested the word. "Yes, Islay is home now, isn't it?" That night, in a bedroom 3 times the size of her chamber at the castle, Lyra lay awake listening to London's unfamiliar sounds. Carriages in the street, vendors calling, the general low roar of a city that never quite slept. Through the connecting door, left unlocked at Bramwell's London house as it was at Islay, she could hear him moving restlessly. "Can't sleep either?" she called softly. "No." A pause. "May I come in?" Her heart hammered. "Yes." He entered in his shirt sleeves, looking oddly vulnerable without his usual formal attire. "I keep thinking about the hearing. Every argument my mother might make, every piece of evidence she'll twist." "Come here," Lyra said, surprising herself with her boldness. She moved over in the large bed, making room. Bramwell hesitated only a moment before joining her, lying atop the covers with careful distance between them. But Lyra closed that distance, resting her head against his shoulder, feeling the tension in his frame. "We'll face them together," she said. "Whatever they throw at us. We'll prove that choosing each other was the sanest decision either of us has ever made." His arm came around her, drawing her closer. "I don't deserve you. Good thing I didn't marry you for what you deserve then. I married you for who you are, scars, eccentricity, and all." They fell asleep like that, still clothed, still technically proper, but tangled together in a way that felt more intimate than any physical consummation could have been. Tomorrow they would face the Court of Session and the Dowager's assembled case. But tonight, they were simply two people who had found each other in their brokenness and built something whole. The Court of Session hearing had lasted 3 brutal days. The Dowager's solicitors had paraded witness after witness. Physicians who spoke of Bramwell's obsessive tendencies, society matrons who testified to his unnatural withdrawal, even a former servant who claimed the Duke conducted unholy experiments in the castle's east wing. But Bramwell's defense had been methodical and devastating. Dr. Murray presented Bramwell's medical research, which had been published anonymously in respected journals and praised by Edinburgh's leading physicians. The island's factor brought ledgers showing the estate's profits had tripled under Bramwell's management. And Lyra herself had taken the stand, speaking with calm precision about their partnership, their work, the rationality of choosing a spouse based on intellectual compatibility rather than social performance. The Dowager's case had crumbled under the weight of evidence, and the court had ruled decisively. The Duke of Islay was of sound mind, his marriage valid, his choices his own to make. But victory in court wasn't enough. The whispers had already spread through London, the Mad Duke and his bald bride, 2 grotesques who'd fled to Scotland rather than face society's judgment. If they returned to Islay now, they'd be running again, confirming every cruel assumption. "We need to be seen," Lyra had said the night after the verdict. Not hiding on Islay, but here, in London, making it impossible for them to dismiss us as eccentric hermits. Bramwell had looked skeptical. "You want to attend social functions after everything London put you through?" "I want to show them we don't need their approval, that we've built something that matters more than their petty hierarchies." She'd taken his hand. "And I want to do it looking exactly as I am." Which was how Lyra found herself standing in her bedroom at the London townhouse on the evening of the Ashworth Ball, the season's most prestigious event, attended by everyone who mattered in society, staring at her reflection with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The modiste had argued against it. The hairdresser had outright refused, forcing Lyra to take the scissors herself. But the result was undeniable. Her new growth, now several inches long and darkly curling, had been cut into a short, close style that followed the shape of her skull. No false pieces, no elaborate arrangements, no concealment. It was shocking, unfeminine by every standard London held. The kind of style that would have courtesans and actresses talked about in scandalized whispers. And Lyra loved it. "You look like a Roman statue," Bramwell said from the doorway. He'd been dressing in his own chamber and now stood in full evening dress, devastatingly handsome despite, or perhaps because of, the scars she knew lay beneath the fine wool. Powerful, classical, nothing like the insipid curls currently fashionable. "I look like a scandal," Lyra said, but she was smiling. "Good. Let's give them something to actually scandalize about, rather than the fiction my mother invented." The carriage ride to Ashworth House felt like traveling to an execution. Lyra's hands trembled as she adjusted her gloves, midnight blue silk to match her gown, which the modiste had designed in the latest Parisian style with clean lines that complemented rather than competed with her dramatic hair. "We can leave at any time," Bramwell reminded her. "Say the word, and we'll walk out." "No running," Lyra said firmly. "Not this time." The ballroom was already crowded when they arrived, the cream of London society swirling in their elaborate gowns and evening dress. Conversation faltered as the major domo announced them. His Grace the Duke of Islay and Her Grace the Duchess of Islay. The silence that fell was absolute. 200 faces turned as one, and Lyra felt the weight of their collective shock like a physical blow. She'd prepared for whispers, for mockery, for the cutting remarks that London society wielded like weapons. What she hadn't prepared for was the visible confusion on their faces, the inability to categorize what they were seeing. Lady Cartwright recovered first, her fan snapping open with sharp precision. Good heavens, the Duchess has cropped her hair, like a French revolutionary. Not revolutionary, corrected the Countess of Pemberton, a woman known for her cutting-edge fashion sense. Avant-garde. I saw something similar in Paris last season, though no one in England has dared attempt it. Lyra and Bramwell descended the stairs into the ballroom, and the crowd parted before them. But this time the space wasn't created by revulsion. It was the automatic deference given to those who commanded attention through sheer audacity. Miss Honoria Blackwood, who'd been so vicious at the original ball, stood near the refreshment table looking like she'd swallowed something sour. Beside her, Lord Pembroke had gone pale, his eyes fixed on Lyra with an expression that might have been regret. Your Grace, Lady Ashworth herself approached, the hostess's diplomatic smile firmly in place. How delightful to see you. And what a striking appearance. You'll set a new fashion, I'm certain. I rather doubt that, Lyra said calmly. Most women lack the bone structure to carry off such a severe style. But I find it suits my purposes admirably. And what purposes are those? The question came from the Duchess of Marlborough, a woman whose opinion carried weight in society. Practicality, primarily. I spend considerable time working in our medical infirmary on Islay. Elaborate hairstyles are rather impractical when one is treating patients or conducting research. A ripple of interest passed through the nearby listeners. Medical infirmary? Research? These weren't the expected pursuits of a duchess. Bramwell stepped in smoothly. My wife has become essential to the charitable work we're establishing in the Hebrides. We're developing a model community with improved housing, education, and medical care for tenants. Work that requires actual labor rather than ornamental participation. How progressive, Lady Marlborough said. And the word could have been an insult or a compliment. Her eyes narrowed thoughtfully as she studied Lyra. You're the girl who published that agricultural treatise, aren't you? The one about northern crop rotation? I am. Brilliant work. My husband implemented several of your suggestions on our Yorkshire estates with excellent results. She turned to the gathering crowd. This is the Duchess you've all been whispering about? The one supposedly too damaged to appear in society? She looks perfectly capable to me, more capable than most. The conversation began to shift. Questions came about the Islay Infirmary, about the agricultural reforms, about the tenant school. Lyra answered each one with precise detail, demonstrating a command of subjects most aristocratic ladies wouldn't deign to acknowledge. She watched the calculation happening in their eyes, the reassessment. This wasn't a pitiful creature to be mocked. This was someone who'd chosen to step outside their narrow definitions and build something that mattered. I think your hair is magnificent, a young voice piped up. Lyra turned to find Lady Sarah Worthington, a girl of perhaps 17, staring at her with open admiration. So brave. I've always hated all the pins and false pieces and hours of torture with hot irons. Then don't wear them, Lyra said simply. Your hair is your own. Do with it what serves you. But society expects you to be decorative and silent. What a dismal existence. Lyra smiled at the girl's shocked expression. You could also choose to be useful and vocal. I recommend it highly. Lady Sarah's mother looked torn between horror and fascination. But several other young women had drifted closer, drawn by the possibility of an alternative to the suffocating expectations they'd been raised to accept. Across the ballroom, Lyra spotted the Dowager Duchess in conversation with the bishop who'd been prepared to annul the marriage. The older woman's face was tight with fury as she watched her plan's complete dissolution. She'd expected her son and his unsuitable bride to be humiliated, to prove her case through their very appearance. Instead, they were holding court like visiting royalty from a more interesting country. "May I have this dance, Duchess?" Bramwell extended his hand as a waltz began. Lyra placed her hand in his and let him guide her onto the floor. As they began to move, she became aware of every eye tracking them, not with mockery, but with fascination. "You're magnificent," Bramwell murmured as he swept her through a turn. "Absolutely magnificent." "We're magnificent," she corrected. "Look at them. We've confused them so thoroughly, they don't know whether to condemn or emulate. Let them be confused. We know who we are." As the dance continued, other couples joined them on the floor, but Lyra barely noticed. She was aware only of Bramwell's solid presence, of the strange new power of not caring what these people thought, of the liberation that came from being so wholly herself that there was nothing left to hide. When the waltz ended, Lord Pembroke was waiting at the edge of the floor. He bowed stiffly. "Your Grace, I wonder if I might have a word." "You may speak here," Lyra said, not bothering to move away from Bramwell's side. Pembroke's jaw tightened. "I wanted to. That is, I behaved poorly at our last meeting. I should have been more understanding about your condition." "My condition?" Lyra's voice went dangerously soft. "You mean my hair loss following a near-fatal fever? The temporary affliction that has since resolved itself?" "Yes, precisely. If I had known it was temporary." "You would still have been a coward who valued appearance over character," Bramwell cut in coldly. "My wife doesn't require your belated understanding, Pembroke. She requires nothing from you at all." They turned away in perfect synchronization, leaving the Earl standing alone on the dance floor. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and careful observation. Lyra could see the shift happening in real time, the tone's opinion leaders moving from shock to curiosity to tentative approval. By the time they departed near midnight, 3 young ladies had asked their modistes about Grecian crops, and 5 society matrons had requested information about the Islay Infirmary project. In the carriage home, Lyra finally allowed herself to collapse against the seat, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. "We did it," she said wonderingly. "They didn't destroy us." "No. You destroyed their ability to categorize you." Bramwell took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You walked into that ballroom looking like nothing they'd ever seen, speaking about subjects they assumed were beyond you, and forced them to reevaluate every assumption they'd made." "We did it together." "Yes," he agreed. "Together." As London rolled past the carriage windows, Lyra realized she felt no triumph over the people who'd once rejected her. What she felt was simpler: freedom. She'd faced the worst they could offer and emerged not just intact, but transformed. She'd proven, to herself most of all, that her worth had never depended on their approval. Tomorrow they would return to Islay, to the infirmary and the agricultural projects and the real work that mattered. But tonight, they'd reclaimed something important: the right to exist in the world exactly as they were, unapologetic and unashamed. The outcasts had become impossible to dismiss. And that, Lyra thought, as Bramwell's thumb traced circles on her palm, was the sweetest victory of all. my beautiful family. If you watched Lyra go from public humiliation to walking into that ballroom with a pixie cut and absolute confidence, please share this with someone who needs to hear it. You know someone, a friend struggling with how they look, a family member who's been rejected, someone who feels damaged, who needs this story. The share button exists for a reason. Use it to let them know that they matter, that their outward looks do not define them. And if you've watched all the way to the end, please like and subscribe to show me that these stories matter to you. Subscribe so I can keep creating stories like this. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions with love. The Victorian Royal Stories team.